Thank you all for joining me for Open Session. My name's Greg Stafford, and I'm someone who's been involved with a lot of different studies related to the Bible, specifically involving groups like the Watchtower Society and other related groups, including my own, which do not fall within many of the mainstream Christian groups. And by mainstream, I really just mean the number of people that are used to them. They've been around longer, right? Different Protestant groups, Catholicism. But we put our beliefs back into the text that all of those groups will often use as the basis for their authority, even if they get authority from it to then establish other teachings different from it. But it all goes back to the text. And so that's what I try to talk about. It's what this channel is about. I'm also involved in a number of other things, primarily as it relates to property insurance, construction insurance, construction defect, liability, commercial general liability, fraud, fighting fraud, and just helping people as often as I can, wherever I can, better understand the biblical text and what it teaches, because of the amount of time that I've spent studying it and teaching it with groups like the Watchtower and on my own, and with others who believe in certain key teachings like I do, that there's one God the Father. We believe in Jesus as the Messiah, foretold well before he was ever even born, in ways that uniquely find application in several different early credible witnesses and texts that we find compelling. And the teaching of both of them, God and the Messiah, to follow the golden rule, right? Treat others the way you want to be treated. Or even if you were to look at it in a more of a Confucianist way, don't do to others things you don't want them to do to you. They both basically mean the same thing from different points of view, because they're involved with treatment or non-treatment that you don't want or do want done to you. And so we find that a consistent rule that allows us to measure ourselves and others fairly. But related to that, we get into discussions of all kinds of things. Like I mentioned already, insurance stuff because of my vocation, textual, historical, religious things, like I mentioned. But then we'll also at times talk about things like movies, right? I do these garbage dumps where they're meant to be exactly what they are. Reviews of the trash that Hollywood, Disney, and Netflix are dumping on us. Right? They're literally taking these movies, these stories, the music, the imagery, all of it, putting it together, charging us money to spend our time to become more dirty, right, in our mind, because what they're filling it for us, right? That we don't have a choice. We go in, we sit down, we watch. That's it. And so they know that, and so that's why they keep serving us it. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. We deal with more of the what's not, right? The hidden imagery and symbolism, but sometimes, like with Cuties or other movies, there's just things that so obvious we have to talk about, in addition to the hidden imagery and symbols. So we do all that because they're important for us in terms of our just religious interests. They're important for our society and growth as a people, as a species, right? We believe made in the image of God, and so we're here to display the character of God. Right? God is love. Not love in a fake way, right? Where people will intentionally damage other people with or without their consent, right? Without their consent, obviously it's more illegal. With their consent, it's not always illegal. But we have different sexual practices, for example, that clearly damage people. And yet the people who are involved in those practices call it love. Run around and yell about love. How loving they are. While they're tearing each other up. Literally abusing each other to the point where they have to have surgery. Or it just gets worse and worse. So, there's all kinds of things that we need to be aware of, even if they're not directly related to our religious interests in the more specific ways I mentioned, right? God, the Messiah, Golden Rule, Although a lot of things kind of can fall into one or more of those categories, depending on how you discuss them. So today we're going to do a news reviews, no garbage dump. There will be one coming up. But we're going to do our second news reviews where we just go to a website, right? Like Yahoo, HuffPost. Those are the two we're going to do today. See if we can get through those, right? And see what they have to say, right? What's going on in these platforms, or what are they promoting? What kind of voice do they have? What with their mouth? What are they speaking? Figuratively, right? What are they teaching with what they're publishing? Let's take a look. So we're going to go first to Yahoo. I'll bring all of you in. I typed in right here. Let's go to it. So let me bring it in so you can read more of the headline stuff, and then we'll see what catches our eye, right? Last time we got in to a review of articles on Yahoo, we found all kinds of things. There may be nothing. I took a look earlier, but these change, right? They go through different news cycles. Some of it may be the same. I didn't really read, if any. I don't think I read any articles this morning. But I did scroll through. I didn't look at HuffPost. But we're going to look through that next. So let's see. I want to make sure you can see with me. So what's really on the mind of people here today, in terms of at least what Yahoo has to say as far as news is concerned, right? I doubt we're going to see anything related to Jah or the God of the Bible. Sometimes, right? Sometimes there's an archaeological find or an article about a story in the Bible. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, right? But that's like very occasional. It's not really common that we find things like that in these news cycles. So what's it going to be like today? Pop that over here. Let's go down. So we have just cycling news to start us off, an ad on detoxification, lifestyle, how to spot the hidden bat. Okay, Halloween stuff, right? We'll skip that. This article about The Boys, right? TV show, I believe. I've not seen it, so I'll just skip it. Many people need a good slap. Patricia Evra hits out at Shambolic United. So, a sports article openly promoting abuse, right? Physical violence. Yeah, maybe many people just need better information, right? Maybe rather than think that someone who doesn't agree with you, and I don't know the issues on this subject, but my point is, if your headline is that people need a good slap, then are you telling me you've really opened yourself up to all of the arguments on both sides so that you can avoid violence? All right? To the point where it's part of the headline? Give me a break. We got Russian-related story here. There's a lot of fake news in this country related to the whole Russian-Trump collaboration in ways that are much more fitting and true of the Clinton administration. As far as the Obama administration, you notice, obviously was in more tension with the Russian government. And obviously the Russian government felt they could take advantage of the Obama administration much more easily, and they were right. And remember, Obama is a closet homosexual. Joan Rivers outed him. He's never denied it. There are photos of him in couched positions, hand-holding with another man. So, unless he just comes out and says, no, I have to accept, he's a homosexual. So he's a closet one, though, right? He can't even be open and honest. We brought this up in relation to this Russian story here. It doesn't directly relate to the whole Obama issue or aspect, but there's nothing really here on this. If anything, it just shows there was nothing there, and they spent all that money with Mueller just to keep trying to find something on Trump, right? And keep the news cycles running negative so that nothing he did ever became positive, right? That's how they are. These Democrats are disgusting. They really are. I just can't see how any Christian would support the Democratic Party. Maybe you can. I'd like to hear from you. And I'm not saying that everything in the Republican Party is like to be supported by Christians. But you're telling me the Democrats, a party that openly promotes abortion, right, doesn't just try to couch it in ways where it's like an unfortunate consequence, so we have to deal with it, right, in the most extreme cases. No, they're really promoting it as like it's a just normal thing, right? They promote homosexual relationships, even though they're legal, right? If a homosexual need a job and they could do the job and I needed a person to do it, I'd hire them. You start promoting homosexual abuse on the job, can't work here, right? We don't promote abuse here. You can be an abusive person according to the law and promote it on your own time, but we don't promote abuse. We'll hire you because the law says we have to, because you can do the job. That doesn't mean we have to all of a sudden run around and start promoting homo lifestyles, which are the worst kind you could have. Everybody knows that. Only few people will say it, though. So that's why we do these news reviews, right? We get right into it. There's no holds barred. I try to keep it, obviously moderated in the sense of language, right? Just like I would in any video or any place. But sometimes the subject matter calls for a more descriptive and potentially offensive discussion because people don't want to hear about it. Well, guess what? You guys keep promoting, and we'll probably get to it here in a moment, homo abuse like it's normal. It's not normal. Any physiological class or anatomy textbook can show you that, or just basic usage of your body's organs and functions. That's why they'll never argue the science or physiology of homoness with you, right? No, they just want to argue that they feel a certain way. It's love. No, it's not love. Love does not end up damaging another person physically to the point where they end up losing on average 20 years of their life, if not more. In addition to higher rates of drug use, depression, all the bad stuff, sicknesses, right? Spreading of disease. You don't get any of that with normal hetero behavior because that's how we were made. Same physiology class or anatomy text will tell you that too. But see, they don't care. They want their homo abuse. And we give it to them, right? Here you go, go. You guys get to do it. We will not discriminate against you. We don't have to like it. No, I don't. Of course I don't. You do, right? You're the homo. I'm the hetero who's allowing you to be abusive with another willing abusive homo, right? Consenting adult. They're pushing for the pedo, but let's just deal with where we are, right? And I'm like, okay, I think that's terrible and disgusting. But it's legal. And if you want to do that to yourself and another person and they consent, go ahead. I don't agree with it, right? But I'm not going to stop them. And I won't discriminate against you in hiring you for work I may need done because you have that abusive lifestyle. As long as you can do the job, right? That's all I care about. Now, I've had homos discriminate against me no matter whether I did the job or not because they knew I wasn't homo or wouldn't, I don't support it. See? So I am the way you should be in that respect, and I think most of us are, right? We can get along and still work with people who don't agree with us as long as it's legal. Not going to get us in trouble, right? Not taking advantage of a minor. That's not enough for a lot of these homos. They want us to like it. Like, I support it. It's like good. No, it's not. We're good in the sense that we're doing the right thing, and we're so good in it, we're allowing you to do the bad thing because we're just that kind of society, right? We're very accommodating to very abusive lifestyles. And then we're very discriminating or resistant to very wholesome lifestyles. That's who we are. In many respects. Not everywhere in the U.S. Not everywhere at all. Many places, though. Many places where they promote these types of lifestyles, right? Southern California, I'm right here. I'm not far from one of the meccas of the homo abuse. Los Angeles, right? And then we have San Francisco. All of these cities that are just dying because they're filled with these abusive people. Racists, right? The people who yell everyone else as a racist are the worst racists I find. That's why they keep calling everyone racist, because it's what's on their mind. Most normal people, when I'm out in the world and I just do what I do, no matter where I am, I always get along with people. I don't have problems with anybody. They have the problems, and then they make all these problems for us, and we end up being called homophobes, right? Homophobe? Do I sound like I'm afraid of homo? No. If anything, it's like with the racist thing, right? They're heterophobes. And so they call everyone a homophobe. The racists are usually the ones yelling the racist stuff the most. In my experience, and I'm in one of those places where it happens. And you can just tell by their actions, right, whether they're racist or not. And so you see a lot of this stuff happening right now with these different police shootings. You see the real racists trying to take advantage of it for their own gain, and the non-racists responding saying, no, wait. That's for your gain. That's for that political party's gain. That's not for the race that you're complaining about's gain. They're liars. Let's get back to the fake news. Well, some of it might be real, but you know what I mean. All right, so we got different rallies around the world, fashion updates, hottest phones. Could talk about that, but I'll skip that. I don't want to get too into it. Okay, so you see a lot of this news, it's just like garbage, you know. Kind of fits in with the whole garbage dump stuff, right? That's why it's news in quotes. Like, look at this right here. Joe Biden widens poll lead as voters say Donald Trump did not take virus seriously. Okay, for all you people who are not in the United States, nobody in the United States believes that's true. Except people in some of these really whack job states and cities where they're run and controlled by liberal Democrat nuts. Right? The ones who openly promote abuse, breaking laws, damaging property, rather than making things better, creating better laws if that's what's necessary, right? That's not what they're interested in. They're interested in anarchy, chaos, right? Taking what they can't earn on their own because they're too stupid, right? They have to take it from people who actually know how to make money in a good way without stealing from everybody in a bad way. That's who they are, right? Otherwise, if they're so smart and great, right? We saw their stupid Chop City get chopped in 1 or 2 or a few days. It was a joke, right? They're sitting there planting these shallow gardens. So, in other words, these are the kinds of people who lie just to take what's not theirs. They really do. That's why they go to the Democrat Party, who does what? Gives them all this money as part of these government programs that keeps them down here, ensures their vote, for doing nothing to improve their lives. And that's exactly why you're seeing so many of the quote-unquote black community. I say quote because it's actually a number of different races, right? They lump them all together like with white. Supporting Trump because they know he's actually doing things that are benefiting the black community and others long term. Not these token handouts and things that just keep you dependent upon the very people who want you dependent upon them. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it is also very similar, as many of us know, to different religious groups, is it not? They want you dependent upon them, right? And so you keep going, different things. I'm not going to get into who it may be, but we've seen those types of things in politics and in religion, right? And in just different aspects of life. People who want to control you for their own gain. That's the Democrats, right? I mean, they'll do, as far as I can see, you're entitled to your own opinion, right? You could even be a Democrat. It's just hard for me to see how you could openly be a Christian and then support all of those Democrat policies that we've been talking about, which involve abuse, right? Lifestyles that actually destroy the parties who want to do them. It's one thing to be for allowing people to damage themselves that way. But to not even try to help them, right? To just openly say, here you go, right? And just go destroy yourselves as fast as you can. They don't care. right? And so their actions show that. The Queen is rumored to drink 4 strong cocktails every single day. I'm not even going to get into that because right away we can see that it involves what? A rumor. That's just a lure, right? It's just designed to get us to click, read the article, and we don't even know where the rumor came from. It's openly stated to be a rumor. Forget it. HuffPost, we'll get to them in a moment. Weekend Update doesn't tiptoe around president and his COVID. We'll get to them. We're going to get to them next. Got the Azerbaijan and Armenian conflict. Hopefully no one is being affected. If so, then, we pray that Jah will be with you. These things do happen. Remember, we will hear of wars and reports of wars. See that you are not terrified, for the end is not yet. Different sports stuff. Okay, we're not getting a whole lot of good material in Yahoo, are we? Although here is an article about Egypt unveils 59 ancient coffins in major archaeological discovery. Let's check it out. You can see the colors and everything still fairly well preserved. Egypt on Saturday put on showed dozens of coffins belonging to priests and clerks from the 26th dynasty nearly 2,500 years ago. So well after Moses, well after the time we're reading in our text readings right now in Exodus. With archaeologists saying tens more were found in the vast Saqqara necropolis just days ago. Let's just read a couple more paragraphs since they're from a time that isn't as relevant for our current text studies or other periods that come to mind. But it does say the 59 coffins were discovered in August, buried in 3 10 to 12 meter shafts along with 28 statues of the ancient Egyptian god Seker, one of the most important funerary deities. That's interesting. So, there are a lot of finds that do provide insights into these civilizations, which are relevant, of course, especially if they happen to be related to or during related to events in the Bible or during times in the Bible that we're studying or will be studying, right? And while this may, to some extent, be a part of that later timeline, it's not as significant where it involves Egypt. All right, so then let's go back and scroll through a few more. This is what we do with our news reviews. We just pull up the news source, take a look. If you look at the news reviews 1, just says news reviews. I may add number 1 to it. It was a few open sessions ago. And we just did what we're doing now. And we found several articles that were like fake news. And then a couple that were pretty useful, actually. And so, like with that Egyptian article, we'll take a look at articles. It's the first time I'm seeing it. I'll let you know if I've read it already. But otherwise, we're just checking it out like we're waking up and doing the news together type thing, which at times will have different articles, right? We're going to go to HuffPost next, though. We're going to go through at least 2. Saturday Night Live and Kate McKinnon pay tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So Saturday Night Live, the worst show in existence, especially in the last, 15 years, with Kate McKinnon, another Hollywood homo abuse supporter and, I believe, participant in the homo abuse lifestyle, paying tribute to one of the most disgusting women ever to be alive, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who helped further the destruction of thousands, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands or more babies. And has served as a shining example of how not to be a woman, according to the Bible. She will show you the path to absolute non-femininity, just like Kate McKinnon and Saturday Night. Those are my thoughts on that article headline. What does Bankhead have to say here? Bankhead, I think, is coming in on my side here. But we'll see what he say. In my humble opinion, you cannot be a Christian and support the Democrat. I agree. You know, I guess I can't get into everyone's mind. So I kind of qualified it a minute ago. And I will, right? I will always let the master make the ultimate decision. But I would have to question, right, if someone were openly promoting the three things, for example, and then the next breath openly promoting the Democrat Party, I'd be like, okay, well, explain to me how that works. You know, I'm into the three things, as you know. How does that fit with you in the Democrats' platform? Right? If the Democratic Party's platform were not so destructive, I wouldn't be so vocal against it. Right? Again, I don't agree with everything in the Republican Party, but they're not doing wholesale destruction of unborn babies and even some born babies, breaking U.S. laws, destroying U.S. cities, and basically making people dependent upon them as long as they can. Right? That's their whole... If you don't see that, I mean, that's all I've seen my whole life. So, and I'm not a political person. As you know, I grew up around the Watchtower. I'm more aware of it now, and I do get involved a little like this, and I may vote. But that's because of the things I'm talking about, right? I'm in a state where we have pedo-friendly laws happening, okay? So we're dealing with some big issues here that I don't know that silence or non-participation is going to solve the abuse, right? And if I can help the abuse of children or keep out of office someone like Gavin Newsom, who's destroying this state, right? Everyone in California knows that. Even most Democrats, I think, realize that by now. I mean, there's some things that just make sense for any community, small or large, because of how terrible certain people and certain laws are. That's, I think, very normal and appropriate, and I don't see anything in the Bible against it. Right? Now, we're going to talk about 666 in a moment, and ways that you absolutely can become extreme towards these political entities. But that's not really related to just basic cooperation to preserve a safe community or state. There's a difference. We'll get to it in a moment. All right, you'll see a clear difference, if you haven't already, between that kind of political involvement and, the furtherance of the beast and its image. All right, let's see. Is there anything else here on Yahoo? And then we're going to go to HuffPost. Cineworld considering closing all U.S., UK cinemas. How many of you would go back to a theater right now? No changes. Right? Maybe you have to wear a mask to get in. Some places like gyms in California right now, they're open. But you have to wear a mask to get in, through the front door, basically. And then once you're in the gym, you can take it off. Doesn't really make sense, but that's California. So, but once they're in the gym, right, when huffing and puffing and doing the workout, you got everyone's air coming out. They're doing that. How many of you would go to a theater right now? I mean, I'm not so sure I'd be worried about the virus as I would be about the movies, right? I'm more worried about the sickness that the movies are going to cause me up here, and the hidden imagery and just the open display of, there's occasionally some good movies. I know, Betsy. I know. But I think Betsy likes occasional movies. But a lot of them are garbage. We know that, right? That's why we do the dumps. All right, I think we're pretty much done here. What was I going to say? Oh, cinema. Okay, so it's little movie stuff. Nothing really going on here. Oh, yeah, Megan Thee Stallion torches Kentucky AG. So, Megan Thee Stallion, one of the preeminent sluts out in the public today, right next to Cardi B, and here wearing the black and white Freemasonry symbol with the swirl. Probably a pedo swirl, who knows? Definitely kind of a hypnotic MK Ultra swirl going on right there. You got that whore. She is. These are appropriate terms, right? Read Revelation 17. Tell me you wouldn't say the same thing about Megan Thee Stallion based on her video with Cardi B. What? So she has earned those labels. I'm not giving her anything unfair. I'm just labeling her what she is. Right? She's attacking the Attorney General, who actually called it right with respect to the Breonna Taylor case, because they after all the fake news lied to everyone, right? It was shown. The quote-unquote black Attorney General showed in his press conference that Breonna Taylor's criminal boyfriend fired the first shot at the officers, two at the front. There was another officer apart from them who responded in a reckless way, but the two who fired back and shot Breonna Taylor were responding to the shot by her criminal boyfriend. And there was a knock and a notice of entry, according to one of the neighbors. So here you have Megan Thee Stallion, who has zero up here and is all about what she can fit in here in ways that just don't look good anywhere. There she is, right? Is going to criticize the Attorney General of Kentucky. That's our news from Yahoo. Awesome. Let's get out of there. HuffPost. Probably, right? Probably the number one all-time horrible news outlet. This is some really bad stuff, right? So HuffPost kind of has a market on fake news and all this stuff. Let's just see if that pans out. Excuse me. So here we are, front page, HuffPost. Docs, Trump blood oxygen dropped twice. Steroid administered. Now, before Trump's doctors even came out, they were running news about how bad it was. Then they came out and kind of gave a more, normal picture. And then the fake news went crazy. Fake news went nuts. And they've ever since, now they're in a news cycle of contradicting Trump's condition. Because they know everyone wants to know, how sick is he, right? Is he going to die? They've already let the fake news rise high. The death rate, although for Trump it's a little higher, but still like what? It's very low. I don't want to guess at, but it's still low. Because it's just not a very fatal disease. But the fake news is going to run with it. That's what they've been doing for ever since he got it. They ran with the story that he was getting worse. And then when his doctors, that team right here that you see on the left, when they came out to do that conference, they've been in this kind of tug of war ever since. Trump to remain hospitalized for a period of time, White House aide says. So, period of time, that's kind of what they want to highlight, right? So it's going to go on for a while. There's not a lot for them to grab onto it. That's what that tells me. But they found that little something, a period of time that they put in the single quotes, right? Not an actual quote. To allow us to think this is going to be like a ongoing thing. After exposure to Trump, lawmakers skirt rules to hop commercial flight. Super spreader Trump attended fundraiser after COVID-19 risk was clear. Didn't he get this? I think they found out that he got it pretty much from the debate, right? That because they didn't take the necessary precautions, like they were lax in almost everything. And so, as we know, they'll do anything to get Trump. They will. The Democrats are nuts. They are. I see them often. They are nuts. Now, there's not as many as people think. But they have the media and a lot of these rioting whack jobs. So they're able to instill fear in a lot of people. But that can change really quickly. And it did several times. And it was really not even much. Once it happened, they were done. But because a lot of these cities are run by Democrats, they can overwhelm areas and even the police like they've done. Because the Democratic authorities, the governor, the attorney general even at times, or district attorney and the mayor, different Democratic politicians in these states, they don't have to listen to the federal government in many respects, unless certain things really become a crisis, right? So they have to deal with it first in ways where they're letting this stuff happen. And so they give Trump, I think that all plays into, of course, them facilitating people who were sick, right? They were infected and they were at the debate. And they didn't take precautions to keep Trump away from those people. And I think even Chris Wallace apologized. Of course, he was a terrible moderator anyway. And I don't want to get into the debate too much, but from what I did see, I just saw Trump trying to make sure he didn't get taken advantage of by the situation, right? He had Chris Wallace, right? He's clearly in the tank against him. And Biden, who could barely hang on, probably has a wire and is dependent upon some sort of concentration just to get a message out, right? And Trump just came in and said, no, I'm not having it. That's how I saw it. Sometimes you have to be like that. I know it came out a little rough, but I think when you're 1 against 2 like that, it really is a fight for survival. You just have to keep going. You can't let them contain you because that's what they want to do, right? And so with the moderator being in the tank like that, it's especially tough on the other participant. Now, that's not always the case. It's not always the case. For example, in my case, I don't feel I was taken advantage of in the 2 formal debates, or even the third debate I did with Maury and Gene Cook, the Bowman Wyden Maury debates. I didn't come away from any of those feeling that they were unfair. So it's definitely, yet I would say they were probably all on the side of my opponents. But here, that clearly was the case. Higher profile, obviously, right? And a lot more politically at stake. And Chris Wallace, and they've been, he's a registered Democrat. And anyone who watches Chris Wallace knows he doesn't like Trump. All right, what else does HuffPost have? We have got no JAH stuff, right? I dedicated like almost half or more of my show to talking about what these people feel is important for us to know. And really, what did we get? So far, nothing, right? I mean, it's good that we do this so we can at times find certain gems, look at all the fake and nonsense stuff, call it out for what it is. But wouldn't it be nice if they had a little more, like on the historical, evidentiary side in terms of just actual evidence, archaeological? I know it's not bar or anything, but I mean, how about just some stuff, right? Give us something that's useful, maybe something more about different functions of the animals or places on the earth. All we get is anti-Trump or, different articles like that sports article that people need to be slapped in the face. There just wasn't anything inspiring is what I'm getting at. But I can think of, and just did mention several categories of inspiring stuff, all kinds of stuff. All the Republicans in Trump's orbit who tested, so it's all just stuff meant to make it seem he's a super spreader, right? A super spreader. That's funny to me, it is. Because, there are certain conditions that allow for it to be spread. And he was put in among a bunch of super spreaders, if I understand what happened correct. So just getting infected, now you're all of a sudden a super spreader? I mean, you are if you read HuffPost, right? People who read HuffPost, this is what they think is happening. Right? They give a more contingent part of Trump's quote, I think I'll be back soon. Nothing like, I'm doing great, I feel better, right? Doctors are great. No, it's sort of a negative contingency. I think I'll be back soon. Maybe, maybe not. Exclusive. Contact tracers didn't get full list of Trump campaign event attendees for 24 hours. They're gonna go with this as much as they can. Defending, now they're gonna hit Trump, of course, and they have been for not wearing a mask all the time. And of course, wearing a mask is actually worse for you many times, unless you're around people with conditions or that could lead to conditions where the virus could be spread by a person's exhale. And that's not often the case, right? I see people driving around with masks in their cars. You're just making it harder for you to get oxygen out of the car air. And their windows were closed up, the ones I'm talking about. Right? And even if they had their AC on with it coming out from the outside, it's still harder to get through that mask. And there's no one in the car. Right? And if they're with you, then they already have it. Right? That's not the people you need to worry about. So everyone's got, and many people I should say, have this just false impression, I think in part because of the way outlets like HuffPost and Yahoo talk about these things. Corporate polluters are always very anti-capitalist, right? And yet, of course, HuffPost and others will sell ads to companies and corporations and make money just like all kinds of other corporate entities. And probably that carries over into different sectors like the oil producing sector, the gas sector. Not all of which lead to the type of pollution that they show right here, right, with these gigantic stacks. I mean, in California, we don't even have, that's our problem. We've had rolling blackouts because of the closure of nuclear power, the failure to build additional power plants, the attempted reliance on wind and solar. Well, that got us rolling blackouts this summer during the hottest months. Hottest days of the month, even, if I remember correctly. So, once again, we don't really get anything from HuffPost, Yahoo. So why waste our time, right? Let's talk about 666. All right. Now, 666. Well, all right. So before that, let's go ahead and look at the text. I'm going to bring up the NWT because, as you know, I haven't translated all of Revelation yet. So if you want to turn with me to Revelation chapter, let's go to chapter 12. Right, we're going to take a good close look at this. I think we can come away from this discussion with two things, at least. One, a better understanding of what the actual number associated with the beast is, and in a less specific than some believe way, or I guess I say a more general sense of what it is. So by less specific, I mean not a specifically named person, but a potentially named person and a category of people that would include the person that many people think of when they come to the name or the number of the beast, 666. So what is it? Is that the number, and is it a specific person, or is it a more general group of people to which the specific person many people think of belongs? Well, let's take a look at the text first, and then we'll answer that. We'll also review in part an article that I think captions some of the main issues and texts you need to know about well enough to have in one place, rather than me give you like several links to a whole bunch of different other things. So go ahead and turn with me to Revelation 12. We'll take a good look here, and then after we're done with this and we review the article, we'll wrap it up, see if you have anything else. Remember, later tonight, this is one of two videos I have today. Later today, we're going to do or this evening at 8 o'clock, part 8 of the Bible and the Trinity in Conflict. Hebrews chapter 2. Verses 8 through 12. And then I'll also take a look at the chat, and we'll review your guys' information. Let's get to the 666 though, and then I'll go to the chat, and then we'll try to wrap it up from there. But we've got a little bit here to review. So let's make sure I have, it looks about right, a little bit more. So again, turn with me to Revelation 12 if you haven't already, or you can just listen, follow along. I'm going to use the NWT, as you know. I'm very familiar with it. I think it's a good Bible in many respects, and I really don't care what anyone else has to say. I do, but you just have to have something to say and tell me why, and if you're not prepared to do that, then you know I've already looked at many reasons why people have for not liking it and for liking it. So, that's why I use it. I'm aware, and I see the benefit. And where there's an issue, I just deal with it. All right, so this is a chapter, as we know, right? Many of us are familiar with Revelation. If you're like me, especially if you've been associated with the Watchtower or the groups, read Revelation a lot, talk about it. In Revelation 12:1, it talks about the battle in heaven, right? First you get the sign seen in heaven. And then it talks about how war broke out. Michael and his angels battled with the dragon. They fought back, but did not prevail. Now, some people, I'm just going to point out here, some people like to believe that Satan is an archangel because it says Satan and his angels. The Bible never actually uses that term for Satan like it does for Michael and Jesus. And the term archangel can mean chief angel, right? And that would mean specific to God's angels, right? So Satan wouldn't even qualify. Not unless he was referred to as an archangel before he became the devil. And it can also mean ruler of the angels, right? So in that sense, you could say he's the archangel of the wicked gods or the wicked spirits, if they accept him as their ruler in that way. Certainly they did here, right? Because they're battling for their place, and they're doing it together to avoid being kicked out, which is what happens. But then after that, right? So he may have been their ruler right here, his angels, but it doesn't say he was their ruler, just those with him, his angels. You could imply that. I think that's a reasonable, implied meaning that if they're his, they belong to him in the sense that he rules them or is the chief among them. But it would be specific to those angels, not to all of God's in the sense that Michael would be. So there's a definite difference when it comes to that and the archangel and the fact that they both have angels. So it says that they got in a battle with their angels. Satan lost. Great dragon was hurled out. So he gets hurled down to the earth, right, with his angels. It says so right here. And then it says, a loud voice, salvation we owe. They conquered him because of the blood of the Lamb, right? And because of their witnessing, they didn't love their souls even in the face of death. Heavens are glad, but the earth has got to get ready, right? Because the devil has come down, very upset. And then it says in verse 13, when the dragon saw that it was hurled down to the earth, it persecuted the woman that gave birth to the male child. And then it says the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, fly to the safe place. And then it says, after that, verse 15, the serpent disgorged water like a river from its mouth after the woman to cause her to be drowned by the river. And then it says, but the earth came to the woman's help. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the river that the dragon disgorged from its mouth. Stay with me. And then it says, and verse 17, and the dragon, right? So the earth stops what the dragon sent out of its mouth to get the woman. The earth stopped that. And after the earth stopped that, the dragon got very angry. Right after that. So the dragon thought it could attack the woman that gave birth to the male child, right, whom we associate with Jesus. The woman then, after giving birth to the male child, and salvation, authority, and the kingdom of God come to pass, the accuser is thrown down. The woman then goes into hiding, the woman that gave birth to the child. The dragon goes after this woman. The earth stops the dragon. And the dragon gets very mad. Right? He gets wrathful. Right? So the dragon sees that. The dragon can see, obviously, the effect of the earth stopping his attack. And he gets mad, or he gets more upset, right? He was already upset up here, according to the text. Come down with great anger because he knows he has a short time. Attacks the woman. Very first thing, woman flees. Earth comes to the woman's aid. Dragon gets mad. Dragon gets mad at the woman and goes off to do what? Wage war. He was already on the attack, right? Right here. He disgorged a river of water from its mouth to drown the woman. Earth comes to the woman's aid. Dragon gets mad, goes off to wage war with the seed of the woman. Remaining ones of her seed who observe the commandments of God and have the work of bearing witness to Jesus. All right. So, well, let's just continue then. The very next verse, right? Chapter 13. We're in the chapter now where we get to 666. So right after the woman gets away, dragon's attack is blunted by the earth. Dragon gets mad, goes off and gets more strategic, you could say, right? Going off to prepare for a war, not just an attack like send the water out now, whatever the water represents in terms of the effect toward the woman. This is a more prepared, planned attack. That's what it indicates. He went off after being unsuccessful to wage war further with the ones remaining of the woman's seed. And it identifies who those are right here. This is the seed of the woman that gave birth to the male child. The dragon, now not being able to get to the woman out of anger, goes after her seed, namely the Christians, bearing witness to God and to Jesus. The very first thing it describes the dragon doing is right here. Standing still upon the sand of the sea. And look at what happens as the dragon stands on the sand of the sea. I saw a wild beast ascending out of the sea, which in Revelation 17 is identified as peoples, nations, tribes, and tongues. Specifically in terms of Babylon the Great sitting over those seas, but it still could be very much related to this here because, again, the dragon goes off, picks a place, stands on the sand of the sea, and as it's there, it's obviously doing something, right? The consequence of the dragon's actions is a wild beast coming out of the sea. I'm going to say the sea of humankind, because that's how it's later defined, with 10 horns, 7 heads, and upon its horns 10 diadems. But upon its heads, blasphemous names. Plural. That's the wild beast right there. Verse 2, now the wild beast that I saw was like a leopard, but its feet were those of a bear, and its mouth was as a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave to the beast its power and its throne and great authority. Verse 3, and I saw one of its heads, it's those slaughtered to death, but its death stroke got healed. And all the earth followed the wild beast with admiration. Verse 4, and they worshiped the dragon because it gave authority to the wild beast. And they worshiped the wild beast with the words, who is like the wild beast? Who can do battle with it? Verse 5, and a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies was given it, and authority to act 42 months was given it. Who's giving the beast authority? Dragon. The same dragon that just chased the woman failed because the earth came and absorbed that attack. Then the dragon went back to gather himself together for war, goes to the sand of the sea. He unleashes this beast, right? It comes out as a result of him being there. Comes out of the very sea in which he is, the stand that he's standing on. He's in that sea. This beast comes out. It's described as we just read. It's given this mouth. And it does what? In verse 6, it opens its mouth in blasphemies against God. To blaspheme his name and his residents, even those residing in heaven. Excuse me. Verse 7, and there was granted to it, the wild beast, to wage war with the holy ones and conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. Which is where it came from, the sea. And so it has authority, great authority given to it by the dragon over all of these people, every tribe, people, tongue, and nation. Babylon the Great has a kingdom over the kings of the earth, including the kings, it would appear, that comprise the wild beast. But we'll get to that later. Verse 8, and all those who dwell on the earth will worship it. This is another instance of all, where it does not likely mean all, right? Because there would still be some who are either going to be caught away with Jesus when he comes, or who live through the Great Tribulation. Unless we're talking about a specific time after which all those who belong to Jesus are taken, and no one on earth is considered to be righteous, but some still survive the end of the system, and then wash their robes and make them white in the blood of the Lamb. That's possible. Or it's a use of all that doesn't mean all. The name of not one of them stands written in the scroll of life of the Lamb who was slaughtered from the founding of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. And then it talks about anyone who kills with the sword will be killed with the sword. And then it says, here is where it means endurance and faith for the holy ones. I saw another wild beast ascending out of the earth. And it had 2 horns like a lamb. And it began speaking as a dragon. Now, what came to the aid of the woman when we started our reading in chapter 12? The earth. Here it says, the wild beast, the second wild beast, ascends out of the earth. and it had two horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. Like something fake, right? Something that's not what it seems. And it's coming out of a place that previously had helped the woman. Verse 12, it, the second wild beast, exercises all of the authority of the first wild beast in its sight. And it makes the earth and those who dwell in it worship the first wild beast whose death stroke got healed. All right, so clearly we have, as was described initially, a wild beast that has 10 horns and 7 heads, and upon its horns 10 crowns or diadems, as was blasphemous names. So it, to me, at this point in our reading, there are several things that are clear, but what's clear to me with respect to the issue as far as 666 and what it represents or who it may mean, it's clear to me the wild beast is not one person. Well, let's see how that might further apply. But it seems pretty clear to me it's clearly not one person, not even one king. But that it is actually multifaceted, it could be multi-governmental, multi-monarch, represent a system of monarchy or rulership essentially, right? That is established from the sea or from the earth of humankind and given authority by the dragon to fight against the seed of the woman. So it would clearly be a representative of the dragon. And it would clearly not be friendly with the seed of the woman that is the dragon's enemy. I think that's clear based on the wrath and the anger of the dragon and the fact that everything he's doing is about waging war with those very people. So the second wild beast comes out. It looks like a lamb, comes out of the earth, speaks like the dragon, has all the authority of the first, makes the people on the earth worship the first wild beast. So they're clearly related, right? Something happened to the first wild beast that had a death stroke, as it says here, and they got healed. So something was destroyed, but then rebuilt or revived. But all in relation to the authority given to it by the dragon to fight the seed of the woman. It says that it, the wild beast, performs great signs so that it should even make fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the sight of mankind. We see that. We see missiles and weapons that are like comets or fire. I mean, especially given their destructive impact, they're seen as basically streaking fiery missiles, right? They heat up, of course, in the atmosphere at different points, and they design the missile to be able to stand on the heat. So essentially burning missiles. You could interpret that as a potential relation, right? If the governments that are set up and given authority by the dragon that do not represent in any way the woman and that resist the seed of the woman, and they're able to make all of these technological weapons and spacecraft that at times can be are in fact fire coming down out of heaven, destroying entire cities, right? Like in World War II. That's a lot of power being promoted through these human entities, governmental systems, that seems to have a unique authority and know-how consistent with what we know of the dragon. Verse 14, and it, the second wild beast, misleads those who dwell on the earth because of the signs that were granted it to perform in the sight of the wild beast, first wild beast, because it says it exercises all the authority of the first wild beast in its sight. While it tells those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the wild beast that had the sword stroke and yet revived. So there's something that the second wild beast is promoting among humankind to do to represent the first wild beast. Verse 15, and there was granted some kind of image that this second wild beast would want everyone to use that relates to the first image. And in verse 15 it says, there was granted to it, second wild beast, to give breath to the image of the wild beast. So the dragon's authority given to these wild beasts, the first and the second, in this case the second, we're talking about right now, the dragon's authority is such that the wild beast can come up with an image and it be given life, like it have an effect, a profound, lasting impact, like a swastika or even a cross. I'm not saying either one of those are what we're talking about here, obviously. I'm talking about the symbol and its effect, how they can be used and given life like this in a way that everyone recognizes, responds to, and that continues to be used in human circles with an effect that is recognized. It could be a flag, right? It could be an image of some kind, like we mentioned, the cross or others, but it could be a lot of different things, but that have that same kind of effect, but that the second wild beast is promoting among those who dwell on the earth. And so it was given authority so that the image of the wild beast should speak and cause to be killed all those who would not in any way worship the image of the wild beast. Now that's a very interesting description, right? Because it's basically saying that after the image of the first wild beast is made by the second, or is brought about by the second, and then given life or breath by the second, it's able to speak and even kill those who don't worship the image of the wild beast. So it's hard to say in what way that is the case, right? It could be figurative, but its effect would still be the same, right? The effect of not submitting to the image would be the same as it speaking and causing you to be put to death, because it's basically alive among us in the same way that those other symbols have that effect and power. Some kind of symbol like that would create this effect among people that would cause them to kill those who don't submit to the wild beast or to its image. Verse 16, it puts under compulsion all persons, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free and the slaves, that they should give these a mark in their right hand or upon their forehead. Verse 17, and that nobody might be able to buy or sell except a person having the mark. The name of the wild beast or the number of its name. So those are two things. A person, as described here, that the image of the first wild beast puts under compulsion after being made alive by the second wild beast, so that you have to accept the mark as either the name of the wild beast or the number of its name. So much so that you'd have to accept that mark in your right hand, or, it doesn't say and. One or the other. There seems to be two ways in which you can manifest this mark. On your right hand or upon your forehead. So that could be literal, right? It could be a literal mark on your hand or a literal mark on your forehead. Or it could be figurative and represent certain aspects of our person and way of life that would be consistent with what the wild beast, the image of the first wild beast are here requiring or putting us under compulsion to do. And so in the next verse, verse 16, it says, here is where wisdom comes in. Let the one that has intelligence calculate the number of the wild beast, for it is a man's number, and its number is 666. Now, as we're going to see in a moment when we review an article that discusses related issues to this subject, there are several early New Testament manuscripts, good manuscripts or texts, in one case a papyrus fragment, that do not say 666. Instead, they say 616, 616. And these are not like spurious texts. There's also the testimony of Irenaeus in the late 2nd century that we'll get to further in a moment, showing awareness of this difference in reading in the text. Not being able to really account for it fully, tries, but, and I'll get into that later in a minute, but he's talking about it. So it's clearly combined with that testimony and the text we have that show both readings, 616 and 666. It's clearly an early reading, one to be taken seriously. So before we get into that and take it seriously further, let's just read the rest of this account. So it says, it gives the number right there, Revelation 13:18. And then in chapter 14, we know it talks about the Lamb, those standing with him on Mount Zion. And then in verse 9 of that chapter, it talks about how if anyone worships the wild beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or upon his hand, he will drink of the anger of the wine of God. The wine of the anger of God. And then again in verse 11, those are tormented, figuratively or literally, day and night, who worship the wild beast and its image and receive the mark of its name. So, worship of the wild beast is clearly involved, is it not? It says that twice in just these two, in just this one chapter right here. If anyone worships the wild beast. Those who worship the wild beast and its image. So this mark on the forehead or on the hand is directly tied to devotion and worship of the wild beast and its image. And then it goes on to talk about the harvest by the angel. And this is where we picked up in our text reading, where we made a parallel with the Song of Moses in Exodus 15. Remember, it talked about how another sign was seen in heaven. Those who came off victorious from the wild beast and from its image, right? The image is alive. The second beast gave breath to the image of the first one. So there's this interplay. The first one gets a death stroke that gets healed. The second one brings about an image of the first one, gives it life. Then it speaks and acts in a way that brings about the death of those who don't worship it. Here in Revelation 15, John sees those who come off victorious from the wild beast and from its image, right? We had to fight the image that the second wild beast is giving life to in some way that we haven't identified specifically yet, but that you could kind of probably see in many, many ways. And from the number of its name. And then it talks about, like we discussed in our prior video, they're singing the Song of Moses from Exodus 15, praising Jah, Yahoo. We also say Yahuwah. I've done a whole video on the pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton. I encourage you to watch it. And the Song of the Lamb. And then talks about his righteous decrees. Talks about the plagues, right? We talked about the plagues, the angels with the plagues, and how those are related to the plagues that were brought upon Egypt and Pharaoh. And then we get to the point where it talks about how it says, and the first one went off. So it's talking about the angels with the 7 plagues. And then it says in Revelation 16:2 that the first angel went off and poured out his bowl of God's anger into the earth in a hurtful and malignant ulcer, like the boils that came upon the magic practicing priests and other Egyptians in the Exodus story, came to be upon the men that had the mark of the wild beast and that were worshiping its image. Excuse me. And then it goes on to say, and the second one poured out its bowl into the sea, right? Which is where the dragon was before, the sand of the sea, but obviously in the sea, out of which the first wild beast came. And then it says that after he poured the bowl of God's anger into the sea, it became his blood, like with the Egyptian plagues. And then also the fountains, the rivers became his blood. And then when we get down to verse 9, it says, the men were scorched with great heat, but they blasphemed the name of God, who has authority over these plagues, and they did not repent so as to give him glory. So the fifth one poured out its bowl, the fifth angel, on the throne of the wild beast, and its kingdom became darkened, and they began to gnaw their tongues for their pain. And then it says, rather than repent, they blasphemed the God of heaven for their ulcers, right? Those who were worshiping the wild beast and its image. And then it says, the sixth one poured out its bowl to prepare the way for the kings from the rising of the sun. And then in verse 13, we read about the frog-like expressions, right? Just like the frogs that were released everywhere in Egypt. Here they come out everywhere over the earth, from the mouth of the dragon, the mouth of the wild beast, and from the mouth of the false prophet. And it says they're expressions inspired by demons that go forth to the kings of the earth to gather them together to God's war, which is in Hebrew in verse 16 called Armageddon. All right, and then this is where, if you look down a few verses with me, as I mentioned earlier, how Babylon the Great was sitting on many waters and how those waters represented peoples, tribes, and nations of the earth. Here's where the angel refers to the harlot sitting on many waters. And then it talks about how, excuse me.
Call from Portfolio.
I apologize. I had that on total volume down, but for some reason. In any case, we'll just deal with that as we have to, right? So then he talks about Babylon the Great being over many waters, and then he goes on to describe the waters where the woman sits, right here in verse 15 of chapter 17, as peoples, crowds, and nations and tongues. And then it says in verse 16, the 10 horns, remember the 10 horns that were a part of the wild beast that came out of the sea? The 10 horns that you saw in the wild beast, these will hate the harlot, make her devastated and naked, and eat her fleshy parts. Okay, so it's obviously going to be a conflict here. And it says that God put it in their hearts to carry this out, this antagonism with Babylon the Great, by giving their kingdom to the wild beast until the words of God have been accomplished. So then it says the woman you saw means the great city that has a kingdom over the kings of the earth. We're not going to get into Babylon the Great too much, really, beyond just the descriptions given here in relation to the wild beast and their relationship, her association with the waters that she's sitting over. But I think it was very clear in our reading, all the way back to chapter 13, that the wild beast is not a single person. Right? It has 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 diadems. It has blasphemous names on its heads. So these could be the names of multiple blasphemous people that are represented in the wild beast and the number or image of its name. And then it goes on to describe the wild beast as having descriptions of multiple types of beasts, right? Like almost multi-governmentally, potentially. And then one of its heads gets killed, but then gets healed, and the earth follows it with admiration. So it's like a succession of kingdoms almost, in ways where people, are sad to see it go, but then are very happy to see it come again in ways that they follow with admiration. And they worship the dragon because the dragon gives the authority to the wild beast that got killed but now is healed. And so they talk about it in these ways, right? But the wild beast is in no way being friendly toward the people of God. It's blaspheming God. It's granted to what? Wage war with the holy ones and conquer them. And authority was given it, the wild beast, over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. Every one of them. So it's not one nation. Or if it is, it's all of them at different times depending on which nation, right? Which nation got its death stroke. Which nation then got healed, and it's like the same one that got killed. Right? Which one are like these different animals that are described. Like a leopard, a lion, a bear. With the dragon's authority. So I'm not seeing the evidence that the wild beast is a single person. And so we're getting to the 666 now, but I want this to be made plain. It goes on then, the wild beast, a second wild beast, right, that makes the image of the first, gives it life. Makes people worship the first one. The second wild beast performs great signs, right? Even makes fire come down out of heaven. Right, so the first wild beast didn't do that. It says right here, the second wild beast, right? I saw another one coming out of the earth. Seems like the same earth that came to the dragons or the woman's aid earlier, but that really isn't always on the side of the woman. I mean, I think there's historical events where we could associate with the people of God at different times in these ways, but that's not what I'm here to do right now. I'm just saying it fits. So the second wild beast has all the authority of the first and makes people worship the image of the first and performs signs the first one didn't do. It performs great signs. It makes even fire come down out of heaven in the sight of mankind. But it's like the first one. And it's even promoting the first one. It's even making an image of the first one and giving life to it that people need to yield to. While it itself is doing things the first beast didn't do. Specifically, making fire come down out of heaven. And I believe that does seem to indicate a period of time like right now where we have a worldwide beast-like system that is capable of bringing fire down from the heavens and has all of these images of all of these ancient kingdoms that are used in a way that make us worship the first wild beast. So it's like we have two different periods of kingdoms ruled over by the dragon, right? The dragon gives the first beast authority, and the dragon gives the second beast authority and the image of the first beast authority through the second wild beast. It's all the dragon, though, together with Babylon the Great, which is over the whole show. It's a separate show. It's another kingdom, though. But right here, we've got this beast that the dragon controls, is using to fight the woman and her seed by using images of the first wild beast as a means of testing whether or not they'll submit to the second wild beast or to the image of the first wild beast. So I see a lot here that associate what is said with the kingdoms during different times before and after Satan was defeated in heaven, that are given authority by him to fight against the woman and her seed And he's using, in the case of the second wild beast, the image of the first wild beast. It's now been given life by the second one. Something the second wild beast, since Satan lost, is using to wage war on those who follow God, right? All of these symbols, all of these signs, pyramids, all of the different idols and representations of the governments and kingdoms of the earth that Satan has brought about. All of the descriptions seem to fit them, just at different times. And so that's why we have all these horns, these diadems, these heads. And the most clear evidence, I think, to show that we may be in a time that fits the second wild beast is because of the way, in verse 13, it specifies that the second beast would be able to do things the first one didn't. That can be done today, pretty much exactly in the way it's talking about. We can bring fire down from the heavens. So that's something to consider. All right, and then it talks about how it misleads those who dwell on the earth. It has signs, right? A lot more than just the fire, but the fire is specified, which we do see and can see today. And then it talks about that number. And it says it's a man's number. Right? Let the one who has intelligence calculate the number of the beast. It says nobody will be able to buy or sell except a person having the mark. And the mark is either the name of the wild beast or the number of its name. So kind of the same thing in two different ways. All right? And there's a process called gematria, or gematria, where you take the total value, the total numerical value of a name or word, and you associate it with a name. Or you take the total numerical value of something and associate it with a name. So you have, for example, another practice called isopsepy. It's just like it sounds, isopsepy. I think it's ISOSEPHY. Where you take the individual values of letters of a word or name to reach a total value. And then that total value is what gematria assigns to a name. But as we're going to see in an article we're going to read in just a second, it's not so easy to do. And I think we have enough clues to, as I said earlier in the show, generalize, in general terms, identify who we're talking about or what the 666 is referring to. So I don't see any evidence at this point associated with the wild beast that, for example, 666 has to be a specific person or that its name has to be of a specific person. It clearly appears to involve many people, many kings specifically, not just one. So let's take a look at this article. It's from September 17th, 2015. The text of the Gospels by James Snap Jr. I'll put a link in the description below. And again, I'm only using this article because I find it's a convenient summary of useful information. That doesn't mean I agree with everything in it, but I think a lot of it is very useful. So let's go through it. He refers to Revelation 13:18, the number of the beast, which is kind of what we're talking about right now, right? Like what we just read. And so he gets into the different variants. And he also talks about, as I did, how, for example, in Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus in the 400s, 5th century, as well as P 115, which he also references, don't say 666, but they say 616. And these are early texts. So then he gets into isopsepy, like I said earlier, and the combination of letters to achieve a numerical value. Talks about how with different names like Jesus, you get these different values. But as he also discusses later on in the article, for example, Irenaeus calculated at least three different persons by the number 666. So he talks about here how Irenaeus seems to have been completely unaware of any proposed connection between Nero, which we'll get to further in a moment, Nero of the first century, and the Antichrist. Instead, Irenaeus understood the number of the beast to be the numerical value of the Greek letters in the name of the Antichrist. The numerical value of the name Neron is 1005 or 955 without the final N, which eliminates him from consideration if one limits oneself to Greek isopsepi versus Hebrew isopsepi, which seems reasonable considering that the book of Revelation was written in Greek. And so he says, although Irenaeus insisted that no one should insist on a specific identification, which is good, on the grounds that if God wanted the name rather than the number to be known, it would have been stated plainly, he ventured a few guesses. The usual Greek isopsepi mentioning Latinos and Euanthus, but favoring Tatan as his best guess. And then he goes on to discuss why Irenaeus came to the conclusion that those individuals could be 666, but it's all based on this calculation of a numerical value for their name, and then just identifying the person, right, based on the numerical value. So in the same way, like he kind of alluded to a moment ago, he says another possibility. Well, let's read this part first more about how the whole 666 versus 616 could have come about. Let's go ahead and just address that right now. So he talks about how Papyrus 115 also gives the reading 616. And then he refers to other texts like Papyrus 47, which uses 666. So there's this division of readings pretty early on. Again, consistent with Irenaeus in his writing about which variant is correct. He goes with 666. But so here's what he says. This is Irenaeus with his discussion that except for this bracketed part is probably what Irenaeus wrote. So Irenaeus said, right in the late 100s, I do not know how it is that some have erred following the ordinary mode of speech. He's talking about 616 versus 666. And have vitiated the middle number in the name, deducting the amount of 50 from it, assuming 666 is the right reading. So that instead of 6 decades, they will have it that there is but one. And then there's this bracketed comment that may not be original to Irenaeus, but we'll read it. I am inclined to think that this has occurred through the fault of the copyist, as it is wont to happen since numbers are also expressed by letters, so that the Greek letter which expresses the number 60 was easily expanded into letter iota of the Greeks. All right, back to what is more likely, Irenaeus. Others then received this reading without examinations, what he says. Some in their simplicity upon their own responsibility, making use of this number expressing 1 decade, while some in their inexperience having ventured to seek out a name which should contain the erroneous and spurious number. Okay, so then he talks about how exactly does one get from, this iota here, right? They don't look similar really at all. And so he says, how could a copyist confuse these? Well, we can only guess. Could be a mistake, right? Maybe a copyist very early by dictation heard someone say it differently. Now, he talks about other things too. Well, we'll get to that in just a second. So, he talks about, okay, so you can see where it's not the easiest thing to change in that way from a visual look at the words, right? For 616 versus 666, visually, it's not an easy mistake to make, but it can happen. Okay, as we're going to see, there's a popular theory based primarily on Hebrew isopsepi, right? The Hebrew valuation of letters and then associating the total value of those letters with a name. It's popular in many circles that use gematria and Hebrew isopsepi to identify Nero based on the 666 total value and its association with his name, as he states here. So let's just read this. Another possibility is that a copyist, thinking he had deciphered the meaning of John's statement and that the leader of the beast was Nero, or someone with a Nero-like character, adjusted the number to make that identification a little easier to perceive. In other words, what he's saying is it's possible that 616 was changed to 666 so that it would more clearly apply to Nero, which is what it translates to basically using gematria in Hebrew isopsepi for the name of Nero, according to some early texts we have. But 616 doesn't do that. Not as specifically as 666 does. So Snap is basically saying that maybe a scribe just made it more apparent that while 616, as we're going to see, does relate to a sort of political god ruler figure, like Nero, basically. It just doesn't name him the way 666 does. It's possible that a copyist changed it to 666 and made that more clear, that it was actually a specific person, Nero, after all that Nero did later on, and they just wanted to make that identification clear. I think that's very likely. I think that's a very, because 616 is the more difficult reading for sure, right? 666 is much more easily associated with Nero than 616. So it provides, to me, a very reasonable basis, a strong basis for a scribe to say, you know what? I mean, this so obviously seems to be Nero here, and this is our biblical text. It's clearly identifying who Nero was. Let's just make that clear. It's not far off from the meaning of 616. I tend to fall into that group, meaning 616 is probably original because it's the most difficult reading to account for, versus changing 666 to 616, a less specific reference to Nero, versus a more specific reference to Nero as original. And I see that as less likely a scribe changing than them changing a less specific reference to a more specific reference, especially since it only involves one letter. So I think I tend to fall in that camp that 616 probably is the original number, and everyone's running around with 666, right? But that's not so far off or even erroneous that it's still not usable in very similar, if not the same way. Let me explain. So 666, as he's explained here, well, he talks about it more. So he goes on to say, as I stopped reading about right here, the Dead Sea Scrolls scholar Edward Cook explained this idea at his blog in 2006. If one utilizes a Hebrew rather than Greek form of isopsepi, that is taking the total value of the individual value of letters of a term and then associating that through gematria with a name, then the total numerical value of the letters in Neron Caesar is 666. This Hebrew form of Nero's name appears in a scroll that was produced during the reign of Nero himself. This is what I mentioned earlier by the earlier texts that allow for this Hebrew isopsepi with Nero's name. So a slight simplification, drop in the final nun, simultaneously drop 50 from the numerical value of the name, thus arriving at the alternative total of 616. But again, it could very well be that 616 was original and then it was modified to 666 to make it more specific. And then he says, yet another possibility is that an early interpreter of Revelation identified the Antichrist as one of the Roman emperors or as the emperorship in a collective sense. The letters in the name Gaius Kaiser, or Caesar, that is Caligula, was the emperor in 37 to 41 before Nero, adds up to 616. And as Adolf Deisman pointed out, so do the letters in the Greek words for divine Caesar, Kaiser Theos, God ruler, a God ruler, a God ruler. Where have we heard that elsewhere. We'll get to that in a moment. So notice, though, with gematria, we could use the early reading of 616 and get Caligula. In both cases, right, 666, 616 through gematria, you can identify specific Roman emperors that could qualify as this kind of beast-like person. But as we read earlier, there really isn't any indication that it's just one person or one ruler or even one kingdom. Right? The wild beast, the first one, seemed to be and was described as having many horns and crowns and heads. And then you had it get healed after the death stroke. You had the second wild beast with the authority of the first make an image of the first and have everyone worship it. Again, that's more than one king or kingdom, it seems to me. So then, could that include Nero and Caligula? Of course, right? They would be prominent members of a beast-like system that opposes the woman and her seed. That's exactly what they did. But notice that 616 also means divine Caesar or God Caesar. Kaiser Theos. A God ruler. Let's take a look at another text that talks in similar ways. Let's go to Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And let's take a look at just a couple verses here. So now we have this reference. We have 666 and 616 potentially identifying specific Roman emperors who were against the seed of the woman. Just like the text in Revelation we read said the beast would be. So the numbers 666 and 616 could represent aspects of the beast that had to be submitted to, right? These types of rulers that wouldn't allow for anything but their rule in order to be members of their societies, like with Nero, who couldn't, as a Christian, obviously, just move around and do normal things, not while being persecuted, right? So they would be representative figures of the exactly the type of thing that the text we read say the wild beast would do, having that number and its name, the name of its number and the number of its name. 2 Thessalonians 2. Now, the early reading of 616, in addition to the early reading 666, both of which can apply to specific Roman seed-resisting rulers, right? Beasts that resisted the seed of the woman. We also have in 616 the gematria of God ruler, a Caesar god. In 2 Thessalonians, notice what it says. However, brothers, respecting the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ in our being gathered together with him, to him. He's talking about the end here, right? Respecting the presence of our Lord Jesus and our being gathered to him. He says in verse 2, not to be quickly shaken or excited through an inspired expression, right? Remember all the frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon and the wild beast and the false prophet. Right? We're not to get excited about those demonic inspired expressions. Through an inspired expression or a verbal message or a letter as though from us. To the effect that the day of Jehovah is here. This isn't really what I'm going to focus on, but I'm going to read that again. Respecting the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ and being gathered together to him, right? The end. This is the end. This is the 1 Thessalonians 4. Gathered, caught into the clouds with Jesus, who has the voice of the archangel scenario. This is the presence. This is being gathered to him. Respecting that. Do not be quickly shaken or excited. Don't do it. Do not do it. Either through an inspired expression, or a verbal message, or a letter as though from us, to the effect that the day of Jehovah is here, the day of the Lord is here, the very thing that he said we didn't need anything to be written to us about, right? That's kind of what he's saying right here. Don't be quickly shaken. Don't get excited by people who tell you things to the effect that the day of Jehovah is here. Respecting the presence of Jesus and our being gathered together with him, don't do that. Don't get excited about that. Verse 3, let no one seduce you in any manner. Because what's it? The presence of Jesus and being gathered to him. It will not come. Remember elsewhere he wrote, you don't need to be writing about times and seasons because we know it'll happen as a thief, peace and security. Here he adds this. We know it will not come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness gets revealed, the son of destruction. Verse 4, he, that is the one who is referred to as the man of lawlessness, the man of lawlessness. He is set in opposition and lifts himself up over everyone who is called God or an object of reverence, so that he sits down in the temple of the God, publicly showing himself to be a God. God King, a God ruler. 616. Here, obviously, it's a more specific type of person, right? Kind of fits the more 666 specific reference to someone like Caligula and Nero, who certainly fit these descriptions in the ways that they acted and the way that they thought of themselves and their resistance to the seed. Notice, though, it calls him a man. So we have at the end times, at the presence, and are being gathered together, right? Exactly what we read about in Revelation 13. About the time when they would harvest the earth and that those faithful to the Christ and didn't submit to the beast were killed. And all that was happening all the way to the point where they were all killed. And it said everyone on the earth was worshiping the wild beast, right? So probably everyone had been caught away or killed by that point. That's what it said. And then it goes on to show them in chapter 14 on heavenly Mount Zion with the king. So we're at the end here. And at the end in 2 Thessalonians, in addition to this, he talks about the man of lawlessness who sets himself up as a god. And in Revelation 13, as we read, how is the beast described? The number of its name is described as what? A man's number. The man of lawlessness, son of destruction, sets himself up as a god in the temple of the God. But he's a man. The dragon comes down after, well, he's thrown out of heaven, right? Comes down to the sand of the sea, gives authority to the first wild beast that has authority over every person and tribe and nation, as we read. And then it tries to make all of them submit to the image, or to its image. It gets killed. It gets healed. The dragon gives authority to the second wild beast that makes an image of the first wild beast that are described as having all these heads, horns, and diadems, crowns, right? And it's described as having a man's number. It's a man's number. That to me seems clearly to specifically state it's something human. It's either a specific human or a human system. Like the wild beast, the dragon brings up from the sand of the sea, and then later the second wild beast he brings up from the earth that previously came to the aid of the woman, right? Part of humanity that got in the way of the dragon attempting to destroy the woman's seed, right? For example, you might see that in World War II, right? So while you might see, I'm not saying that's what it is, but if the seed of the woman was under attack during World War II, and obviously it was, whether or not that's this specific thing or just a part of it, right? Clearly, anyone associated with the woman of God and her seed, and that seed would be under attack during times of World War. But what happened? The earth collectively came and fought against, you could say, the dragon, unleashing this wave of war, this flood of war, to try to overwhelm the development and the sealing of the seed, right? What does Revelation 6 say they're waiting to do? Right? Why is the dragon so angry and vengeful at the seed? Because, why? He's mad he has a short period of time, right? We read that in Revelation 12. Then he gets even more upset when he fails to flood the woman and goes after her seed. And then it says right here in Revelation 7, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the slaves of our God in their forehead. And in chapter 6, it talks about how a white robe is given to those who cry out for vengeance because they've been killed and they're with Yahoo. They're told to rest a little while longer until what? The number of their slaves are killed like they have been. They're sealed. The dragon is interfering with this sealing of the seed of the woman. And that's what he's doing. And whether or not you see things like World War or World War II as like part of or the disgorgement of water. I'm not trying to make an application that's specific to anything time-wise, but it just seems to fit in terms of what took place as at least an example of how this could take place. So that you could have the dragon using war to overwhelm the seed of the woman and the earth responding by stopping the agents of the dragon's attack on the earth, on the seed of the woman, effectively stopping, for example, the Nazis and their allies, but without really any desire to specifically help the woman knowingly, more just as a reaction to what's taking place that involves the woman, because she's on the earth in that way as her seed is still continuing where the dragon has been thrown. And so that's why when we look at the earth in that way, the wild beast, the second wild beast coming from the earth, still, I believe, could be the people that came to the aid of the woman, knowingly or unknowingly, in response to the water released by the dragon. So you have all these elements at work that I'm not saying I'm identifying, 100%. I'm just saying in certain ways they seem like this could be it or part of it, and an example of what is being talked about. But all that the dragon is doing after failing to get the woman and the child has been protected and taken away is to get the seed of the woman. And the wild beast is brought out of the sea by the dragon after it fails to get the woman initially. So it seems to me to be something set up by the dragon after it fails to drown the woman, that is then damaged or destroyed, given life again, healed, probably by the dragon, And then the dragon brings out a second wild beast from the earth that has authority over all the peoples and tries to put them under compulsion to submit or worship. It said that specifically twice at least in Revelation 14, the wild beast and its image and the number of its name. And then it says in Revelation 13:18, it's a man's number. So I believe that the sea that the first beast comes out of, the sea of humanity over which Babylon the Great also has a kingdom, according to Revelation 17, and the earth that came to the aid of the woman, also humanity, and like in Genesis 11, right, the earth was of one language, the people on the earth, show that the wild beasts, the first and the second, are of human origin. They're human systems that the dragon has conjured up and given authority to and speaks through and is using to fight the seed of the woman, the ones who have the responsibility of bearing witness to God and to the Christ, no matter what these beasts say or do, no matter what they try to do to pressure us into submitting and worshiping its disgusting image, which represents all the blood of the holy ones who have died in the kingdoms of this earth since the beginning. And that's why the wild beast and Babylon the Great and the beast image are destroyed, while all those who live and die faithful to God and to the Christ live on or come back to life. So, to summarize this whole 666 part of the show, I would suggest you become familiar with the potential applications of both 666, specifically to Nero, either as a person who fits the descriptions of resisting the seed of the woman in the ways that the Bible describes, but not limited to him, because he doesn't fit all of the descriptions and the ways, but he certainly would be representative of it, right? And certainly someone in the mind of the early Christians that would be representative of the type of system that would do these things. And then you have, now that's not the only person though. It's just Nero is one that famously comes up because of the time in which he lived, the things he did, and the fact that through Hebrew isopsepi, you can assign the value of 666 to what appears to be his name, basically, according to early texts. But we also have early texts of the New Testament, one of which I believe is the earliest, or one of the earliest, in P115, that show the reading 616, which is also consistent with a ruler like Nero in Caligula. Not worse, right? And also with other things, both of whom put themselves up as a god, right? And openly defied the Jews and their worship of God during this time, and the Christians, everything associated with both of them, preferring instead to have sacrifices offered to them, to be viewed as a god. And then that being representative of the type of political system that Christians would constantly have to face until the time of the presence of the Christ and are being gathered together with him. So I believe that 666 or 616 are references to Nero, Caligula type rulers who set themselves up as a god, or to a more general god king ruler, a Kaiser Deus, which you can also achieve through gematria using 616, that is consistent with 666 and the gematria that results in Caligula or Nero. So that you have in both cases, really, essentially the same thing. 666 is more specific, and in my opinion, therefore, likely secondary, because it's the easier reading to account for. That is, a scribe could see that it more specifically fit someone like Caligula or Nero and change the less specific reading 616 from God King or God Kaiser to a specific God Kaiser that they could relate to when interpreting these texts. Or it's just, as I mentioned, the 616 and the God King Kaiser text that I believe is the more difficult reading to account for, and so more likely original, but still consistent with the gematria of 666 as it may apply to Nero or Caligula. It's representatives of the God King type that could be referenced in 616. So I hope this discussion has been enlightening for you. I will put the article from Snap that we reviewed. It has more information. I encourage you to look at it, so you get a full, and well-rounded understanding of the text and the issues. But I think we covered the main points, at least the points that I think are important to remember. We also reviewed some of the text. We had a kind of more complete understanding of how the beast is described, right? It doesn't really seem to specify an individual, although when you look at it in light of 2 Thessalonians and the man of lawlessness, right, and it's a man's number or man's name, it could be a specific individual as part of the beast that is described as having clearly more than one ruler or more than one kingdom in Revelation 13. All right, let me take a look at some of your questions or comments here. And then I'm going to end the show, get ready for part 10 later on. Let's see what we got, though. I know there was a lot. You guys were great. I appreciate your time and all your comments here. Bankhead's funny. You guys had a lot of good comments. Looks like good participation. I hope the mic worked out okay. And so Timmy's wrath. Should we still expect things to get worse against Jesus' followers? What does the text say, right? Worse is relative, though, right? I would definitely not walk around thinking gloom and doom all day. No, don't do that. If your day comes, it comes like that. There's nothing you can do. What you should do is convince yourself to be ready to state the truth. What you really believe is the case, no matter what. We all have to die someday, unless we're continued on, right, by Yahweh in our belief. The point is, how are you going to die? How are you going to leave? How are you going to state your case? And you can either give your life for a lie or something you don't really believe is true, right? Someone pressures you to say something, but you don't really believe it's true, right? Submit to the beast, right? Confess the beast's name. Take it on your forehead. Take it on your, whatever it is that we can clearly see is the case. Try to be pressured if we're pressured. It says made under compulsion in ways that maybe we're not right now. Clearly seems like we're not all being made under compulsion right now. But that doesn't mean it couldn't apply at times, right? Even during Nero and at other times, people were required to give sacrifice. You could look at different nations like Japan during World War II, right? They had to view their emperor as a god, right? So for different groups and nations at different times, these texts could directly apply, right? It'd be hard to convince them. Some of the early Christians under Nero and others, or of course they didn't have John's text then likely, but either way, later, yeah, and then of course people who had those texts and maybe lived under the imperialistic Japan, just as an example of a ruler, a god king ruler, who put you under compulsion to do what they said, or you can't participate in the economy or buy or sell. So there are examples of exactly that. It has happened specifically to different nations and peoples at different times. So do these texts just apply to different people according to their life and period of judgment? Does God allow for different nations at times to manifest the traits of the beast in order to test those who would be part of his sons of the woman's seed? I don't know. That's what he does. Those are his activities. I can see it happening though. Right? Just like I said in Japan. I can see faithful Christians living under imperialistic Japan dying, not giving in to the beast God king ruler, no matter what, right? Whether it's their life, their ability to buy or sell. Are they not being sealed as faithful in doing that? Is it not an example of not submitting to the beast system of God king rulers that the devil brought out of us? after being thrown out of heaven, right? He can't bring it out of heaven now in some spiritual way, probably. So he's manifesting it from us, like in our own way, outside of the kind of spiritual power maybe they had at one time before they were thrown out. And so that's why we don't see the same type of miracles, but we have this massive technological explosion. And so that's how they're manifesting their power. Right? That's how fire is coming down from the heavens. The wild beast seems to be doing that to me. So we have either these different specific times when people are going through these beast testing judgment things, or we have, and maybe we have both, right? We have the specific examples where these texts apply to people during different times, like I said with Japan. And then we have the final time where we have the wild beast and all of its kings and everyone assembled according to Revelation 16 and following for the war of God Almighty, right? Against the Lamb. They stand against him, it says, and they get wiped out. So we know we're leading to that. But that's after the beast has already killed all of the seed of God's woman, who are now with the one riding on the white horse, right, and coming to execute judgment. It seems like that anyway. Sometimes it's hard to tell with the different scenes in Revelation. But in any case, sometimes things are good and sometimes they're not, right? Sometimes we go through more open and obvious physical testing. Sometimes we go through more mental, spiritual testing and evaluation. Sometimes we may have to suffer and die. Sometimes we may live a long time. We don't know. We won't know. So I encourage you to think the best way, be the most positive, think of living as long as you can and doing the most that you can in the best ways that you can. And if Jehovah or this system tell you that's not going to happen, well then we'll deal with it then, right? Let's deal with what we have made available to us. Right now, we have available to us opportunities we may not have in the future. So let's use them as long as we can. Let's be aware of 666. Let's be aware of 616. They both appear to have reference to pretty much the same thing in general. Right? Specifically, there could be an issue there as far as Nero or Caligula, but they represent the more general aspect of what the beast clearly represents, right? This humanistic antagonism brought about by the devil against God's people. So prepare for the worst, expect the best, trust in God always, and follow the Christ, right? You do that, and I'm confident things will work out the best way, even if we have to give our life, right? What better thing could we give our life for than resisting this system that tries to force everybody to worship it, right? Through its propaganda and all this stuff, fake news, and of course it can get worse, right? Actual compulsion. Jehovah doesn't do that. The Christ does not do that. They let us do what we want, for good or bad, right? That's what we want. We want someone that lets us say, okay, I can see that. I see that. I'm going to do those things. And of course, not everyone chooses the same things, but we want the opportunity, do we not, to choose who we're going to worship? Well, the wild beast and the devil and the things that it's using aren't about giving you your choice. Because if that was the case, then they wouldn't be so bothered by the work of the seed of God's woman, right? It wouldn't bother the devil so much if people were out praising God and bearing witness to the Christ, right? But it does. Oh, it does. Because that's why he got thrown out. And that's why he knows he has a short period of time. And that's why he's very angry. So we should watch out. Yes, Timmy's wrath. Watch out. The devil has come down to you having great anger. But we're not alone. Right? Don't be afraid. Just don't walk right into his space. You can tell. Most times you can tell. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes we have to just go through the trial. A lot of times we can avoid the devil. Right? Stay out of his way. Right now we have certain powers helping us to get this message out. As long as they let us do it, as long as we can get it out, let's get it out. All right, so I appreciate that. Thank you all. We'll be back later tonight for part 10. So that's coming up when? Oh, so about a little over 6 hours. Not too long, right? Why don't you all take a little time, get some rest. If you can join me live, I encourage you to do so. I'll be back later this evening for part 10. I enjoyed this open session. We'll try to do it again soon. Other than that, until then, have a great afternoon, and I'll see you again this evening.